What it do, what it do. This is the Brothers on Books podcast where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations and if you would like to be a guest host. With that, I am here in Vienna with my brother Alex in Nashville, Tennessee, and it is a very special day because we have a good friend on the show and our very first guest on the Brothers on Books podcast. Richard and I both work at the same company in Charlotte, North Carolina. We started hanging out while sitting in the life pricing exam, which is part of the actuarial exams. I'd like to say that I've admired Richard since I met him, and he's truly persistence personified. He is also always up for a challenge, which I think is a reason we have done so many long walks together. And when I say long, I mean really long. We walked a marathon about 2 months ago. And with that, I will turn it over to Richard for a brief intro.
Hello, everyone. This is Richard. So I'll give you a little bit background about myself. I'm originally a New Yorker. I've been in this profession for over 12 years. I knew Jack back in my exam days. I was taking exams, and Jack is definitely on the point. I definitely love challenges. In fact, I'll put it to you this way: if you're not challenging yourself in life, you're not growing. Jack, back to you.
Cool. Yeah, you want to just give us a recap of what the clue was for last week and what book we're going to be discussing?
So last week's clue was it's not one ring to rule them all, but it's the next best thing. And if you got that clue, then, you're quite insightful because it was maybe only an okay clue. But we were doing the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. For those of you who don't know, Miyamoto Musashi is a samurai, or more aptly known as I think eventually ended as a Ronin, which is a sort of a samurai without a master. He was born in 1584 in Japan and then eventually died in around 1645. He is best known for his incredible swordsmanship, philosophies and strategies throughout war, as well as writing two books. The book that we're about to be doing, the Book of Five Rings, and then the Path of Aloneness. So the Book of Five Rings primarily deals with his strategies on how to fight. And then the Path of Aloneness mainly deals with his ideals and philosophies behind it. So with that said, there's also, I sort of recommend everyone go look it up. There's an incredible building in Japan that is dedicated to the practice and training of his philosophies of war. It's a very cool looking building, and I just think everyone should go look at it. It's architecture. So with that said, I guess, Jack, you want to kick us off with sort of your thoughts and about how you felt about this book?
Sure. I think we're going to go scroll by scroll on this guy. I like the book. When I first read it, I thought it was a little bit of an oddball that it would be in a business section. But it has become, known as a business book. So the five scrolls, we have the earth scroll, water scroll, fire scroll, wind scroll, and then the scroll of emptiness. And I think we'll just go scroll by scroll. So I'll kick it off with talking about the earth scroll. And this scroll is basically an outline of the science of martial arts and the analysis of his school, which he called Two Swords in One. He had a couple of, I guess first, before I read this book, I would have thought martial arts was kind of like Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee type stuff. But I think in his language, he's really meaning like someone who's mastered the long sword. He kind of touches that it's really about the long sword when he says martial arts, or I guess when someone in this time period used that term. So I guess I'll just walk through a couple things that kind of stood out for me. Early on in this scroll, there was a couple negative quotes kind of where they said, where Musashi says, people have the idea that warriors only think of being ready to die. And I thought this kind of contrasted in an interesting way with the episode 2, when we did the 50th law with 50 Cent Robert Greene, where they talk about you have to be like comfortable with your mortality for you to actually live. And he was saying so he was saying people, have this idea that warriors only think of being ready to die. And he kind of counters it with, it's really everyone that has to come to terms with their mortality. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that one. And then there's also this idea that these critics of martial arts were saying that even if you study martial arts, you won't be able to put it into action when the need arises. So like if a mob starts attacking you, are you going to be able to draw on all of the practices and teachings that you've learned over the years? And Musashi kind of counters that with, the true science of martial arts means practicing them in such a way that they will be useful at any time, and to teach them in such a way that they will be useful in all things. And to me, this kind of said you need to be learning with a sense of like, you want it to be in like your long-term memory. Like it needs to be like at your core, like you want to be able to embed it in your like persona. So you don't have to think about, drawing from that experience or that practice. It kind of made me feel bad from some of the studying I've done, because there's a lot of the stuff I've just forgotten. So maybe going forward, I try to like learn things with more of a long-term view and trying to remember them permanently. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that one.
It kind of makes sense. You either use it or you forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you learn that you really don't need, have
Right.
no real practical application in your life. So,
but I also kind of like that he says that teach them in such a way that they will be useful in all things. So I think he's kind of talking also about like building off of one skill, like using that confidence to acquire other things in life, not that like transcend just skills from a longsword. So I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, that sort of goes back to a lot of, there is a emphasis in many like samurais to be not just, adequate with fighting, but also to be like sort of artists, like writing poems, playing music, all these other types of like art things that you definitely wouldn't expect with today's like what would be considered like military or warrior class that was emphasized back in Japan, which has sort of been lost, which I think is probably what he's referring to.
Yeah, because he goes on to he talks about like the kind of the 4 walks of life, where he talks about the farmer, the merchant, the knight, and then he's got this part where he kind of compares the skilled martial artist to like a carpenter, like knowing how to use all these skills and tools. And he, I guess the Japanese characters for carpenter actually mean like great skill or master planning, something like that. And he talks about how they're very much related, and the master carpenter will know what tools to use when, and how to use his people correctly, how to, temper expectations for what certain people can do and can't do, and how to teach them and, build their confidence and whatnot. And then I guess the second theme, or the second part of the Earth Scroll, was where he talks about his school that he calls 2 swords in one. And he really emphasizes being able to hold the longsword with one hand. And I guess a lot of other forms of martial arts have like this long sword you're holding with 2 hands. But he talks about how you must be able to hold it with one hand, even if it's hard in the beginning, because he talks about, you need to hold the long sword in one hand and the short sword in the other. And he says all the disadvantages from needing two hands to hold the long sword, and like riding on horseback, it's difficult to hold it with two hands, and you need to be strong enough. And even though it's heavy in the beginning, if you practice, you'll be able to do it with one hand, and then you'll be able to assume more tools with your other hand. Yeah, so any thoughts? And then I guess that goes into my favorite quote of the whole book, that says you should not have any special fondness for a particular weapon or anything else for that matter. And that kind of goes back to what I was just saying, how he's talking about learning all these different skill sets and how to use all these different weapons to accomplish your goal. And in this case, it was killing a person, I guess. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
I mean, that principle is definitely sound if you really think about it. And the example would be a sword. Sword is usually good for close combat, and if you have to deal with if you have to deal with crowds or people who are close and personal, sword can be very effective. A spear, though, would make better crowd control, and you want to keep people at a distance when you're using it. And the reason why is that you're dealing either with an opponent that can counter you in close combat if you're using a sword, or you're dealing with multiple people at once.
Mm-hmm.
And what a sword can be used for is not exactly what would be a better fit for a spear, and vice versa. And you want to keep that in mind when you're dealing with applications in the real world. One approach to solve a problem may not work for other approaches.
Yeah.
And what Miyamoto Musashi is trying to get to is that you got to have an open mind given what situation that you're in.
There you go. Diversify your skills.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything there, Al?
I mean, I would just say, sort of back to what Richard was saying, in terms of, there's a right tool for every job, right? Sort of taking back to your carpentry analogy. You wouldn't want to use a hammer when you need, a screwdriver. It's sort of the same you have to be able to adapt and use many different types of tools. So I also agree.
So I guess it's pretty, I mean, he also touches upon like rhythm. He talks about like the rhythm of life, and how, rhythm of earning money and losing money. That's kind of how he closed up the Earth Scroll. I guess the only thing I could think of relating to that was when we were at soccer camp as kids, like they would wake us up at like 6:30 in the morning for soccer aerobics. And they always talked about like rhythm with the ball. So I guess he kind of says like rhythm with weapons and rhythm with your opponent. And I guess I was thinking like, yeah, at soccer camp, they wanted us to be in rhythm with the ball, and basically to kind of have the ball be an extension of our body, basically. And we got to get in rhythm with it. So I guess that's about it for the Earth Scroll. So Richard, you want to kick us off on the Water Scroll?
Absolutely. And when I was going over the Water Scroll section of the book, I noticed that Miyamoto Musashi treated it as the science, or the way of how you're supposed to be fighting. And he, in the Water Scroll, mentioned that when you practice the art, you have to be like water. And you have to fill in the container that the water is in. So for example, if you're dealing with a tall container, you want to adjust yourself such that you fill in the tall container appropriately versus a short or flatter or fat container. And he focuses on the Water Scroll specifically with a state of mind. So when you're applying the principles, first off, mentally, you have it in your mind as to what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And with that in mind, he also emphasizes that you want to pay attention to your form when you exercise. For example, when we were talking about using the appropriate stance, you want to make sure that the sword is tilted in the right manner. You work on your footwork, you work on your body, emphasizing like straight form, no crookedness anywhere. You want to give yourself that appropriate form such that if you have to make a move, you can execute it without making minimizing your mistakes. And he emphasizes that because this gets back to one of the points that I saw, is that perfect form leads to perfect execution. And this ties not only to the mental but also to the physical as well. And that's how he ties it into talking with the scroll. And one of the things I notice is that he really emphasizes about digging into your heels when exercising said form. And this kind of reminds me of what actuaries, what finance people, what many people in the professions do, is that when they exercise their art, they're really digging into their heels and they're thinking about what they've been going through, what they've been training to be able to execute what they are supposed to be doing. And with respect to the guard work for the sword, he mentions the 5 kinds of guard. How you're supposed to hold the sword in each position. And when you hold the sword in each position, it's supposed to serve a certain purpose. For example, if you use a high guard, it's more for offensive attacks. Whereas if you use the middle or low form, is basically more for parrying your opponent's sword or being able to get quick strikes or even trying to defend yourself from surprise attacks. And this ties back again to making sure that you know the forms, when to use them, having the back of your mind that you're executing the technique properly. Now, I also noticed that you basically digged into the details as to how you're supposed to be using the techniques. And this is going back to not only knowing the techniques and being like water having in your mind, but you also have to use these techniques as second nature, such that you can understand your enemy, you can size him or her up, examine strengths and weaknesses, where to strike, where not to strike, how to hit, how not to hit, what are the chances that if you execute a move, you can be countered. And he emphasized that if you use the wrong move when you're not supposed to, then the enemy can easily counter you, or worse, the enemy will lay a strike on you and you'll most likely end up dead. And I'm thinking back to real life applications where if you're not using the right technique, it's probably because you're not thinking about it in the right manner, or you didn't perform enough analytics onto that. So taking, for example, in the actuarial profession, if you're working in a projections or in a finance position, and if you're using pricing concepts, some of the concepts may apply, but the pricing world is much different than the financial world. Financials deal with current results and they want to see current metrics. But the pricing world, they think more how, if they set certain prices or these certain approaches, how that would affect in the future. That form doesn't exactly work. And if you carry one form or one mindset over to another application, then chances are something is not going to go right, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Jack, do you have anything that you want to add to that, Al?
I think the things. So I think this part was also the quote where he talks about. I mean, it's kind of gruesome, but he talks about when you take up the sword, like you have the idea you're gonna kill the opponent, and like if you forget that the end goal is killing the opponent, like if you're just thinking about blocking, like you're never actually gonna kill. So like it's always to have the long game in mind, also, I guess. Or like I guess since we've been playing pickleball a lot, it's like kind of setting up the kill shot, and always having that setup in mind. And there was also, I think this was the section, let me check, where he talks about being able to see things that are like far away, like you're up close, like in terms of like visualizing, and then also like what's up close, like from a distance. And I guess I think a lot of people talk about being able to like zoom out and look at themselves. but I thought the idea of looking at things that are far away from up close is not as much talked about, but I guess I thought of like visualizing, like you need to be able to visualize like the end goal or like you're already there, and then kind of figure out what you would need to do to get to that spot. Yeah. Al, anything?
Yeah, I think I'm about good on that one. I think you guys,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah, I guess in what did like 50 Cent use that water? He
be
talks
water.
about
I mean,
he talks
be
about water in
formless.
terms of being like
Being
flexible a
formless.
lot. Yeah.
Be
So
able to evolve and adapt.
kind of
That's
similar.
also a Bruce Lee adage as well.
Oh,
Be
really?
water. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well,
I guess that brings us to our first ad slot for this episode. And our first ad is brought to you by pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of. Pickleball is the fastest growing leisure sport in the United States. It is a mix between tennis and table tennis. However, don't let the average age of participant in this sport fool you. The game has fierce competition and only the will of a champion can thrive. Go buy some paddles and balls and play pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of.
I barely ever buy clothes, but there are a couple things I've been buying twice every year for the past 5 years, and that is Pair of Thieves underwear and socks. I buy Lucky underwear and socks before every actuarial exam, and they are so comfy and uniquely stylish. Go to pairofthieves.com or your neighborhood Target to peruse their selection. Why be just one when you could be a pair of thieves?